Welcome back, folks, to the Ultra Catalyst podcast. We're talking about the taper week. You know, that little bit of time, 3 to 7 days before your next race. I'm going to give you 3 different strategies that you want to focus on to make sure you're in peak performance when it's race day. Now, thanks for tuning in. You know, here at Ultra Catalyst Podcast, we like talking to people and listening to how people improve. Today, it's just me on the mic, and we're going to be talking about my adventure leading into the Ironman 70.3 Chattanooga coming up next weekend. Now, traditionally, what you want to do in a high endurance activity sport, like a triathlon or ultra running or some sort of extreme type event, you're going to be training very intensely from anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months to 12 months, and even beyond that, depending on how many races you're working towards, as well as what is your cadence of when you're going to be participating in those races. Now, for the later half of the year, my cadence is going to be one ultra event every single month throughout the rest of the year. So a little bit different, but for anyone that's just starting in, maybe you've planned to do one race. Let's say it's a half Ironman, maybe it's a marathon, a full Ironman, or maybe just a 50K. Whatever the case is, all of those activities are equally difficult based on where you're at within your training, as well as what your goals are. Now, going into a 70.3, you'll hear this a lot in different communities, or if you have a triathlon coach or you talk to other individuals that have completed Ironmans or triathlons in the past, typically the week before, about 3 to 7 days, maybe 3 to 5 days, depending on how your training is, you're going to go through what's called the taper week. And that's typically the week before your event. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're actually going to be lowering your intensity and duration so you could focus on rest and recovery. That way, when race day comes, you'll have full energy to really explode and perform at your highest capabilities during the race. So today we're going to talk about my 3 strategies to make sure that you have a successful taper week. Number 1, and this is the most important thing, not just in triathlon, but in life in general, you got to get good sleep. Now, as many know, if you're starting out in an ultra endurance activity, sometimes they have weird start times based on when you normally get up in the morning or afternoon. So for traditional Ironmans, 70.3, 140.6, it's going to be between about 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., sometimes a little bit later, depending on weather conditions, whatever time zone or country you're in. And it really corresponds to about when the sun comes up. And then that way they're able to conduct that entire event because they're going to have to shut off some roads and there's going to be permits, right? So you got to think through while they're doing it. Now, the reason why I say sleep is the most important thing, you could ask any triathlete out there, depending on where they are in their journey, whether if they're a brand new person or even someone that's seasoned, that's been in doing multiple seasons over a long period of time, is typically the night before, you're going to get almost no sleep. Just like when you were in college or high school or wherever, or a job interview, you're preparing and you're getting all psyched out the night before, but you got all these random thoughts and you're going to have a hard time sleeping. That's why I say it's very important during that taper week that you're blocking in additional hours of sleep. And so what I typically will do is I'll adjust my bedtime a little bit earlier and I'll get up a little bit earlier to make sure that I'm up and ready and in that flow state that when the race starts, let's say about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, maybe 8 o'clock, depending on where you're at, you're ready to go. Now, I will say that getting up for an Ironman can be a challenge because typically you're going to be awake 2 to 3 hours before you actually start racing, right? So you get up, you eat a little bit, you get to the event, you check your bike, make sure you got all your stuff, you prep, you stretch, and then you're typically going to be waiting in line for the swim start, which could take anywhere from 15 to an hour plus, depending on how early you get there, right? So if you think through it, if the race starts at 7, well, you're probably getting up at about 4-ish, 4:30, maybe 5 at the latest, so you could go through all the different check-in procedures as you're preparing for your race. So as I mentioned, number 1, bank extra sleep. Get at least an extra 30 minutes, extra 45, maybe an hour if possible each night leading up. That way, when you come to that night right before, you're a little well rested and you're not thrown off guard because you know that your mind's going to be in overdrive as you're trying to prepare and replay what you're going to do during this event. Or maybe it's just your nerves or your energy. So remember, align your sleeping to start getting up a little bit earlier because it will be an early morning, and try to add in a little bit extra time every single night leading up to the event. And believe me, as a parent of two that has to do a lot of traveling here and there, it is tough to adjust your schedule, especially when you have little ones at home. What I do is I just have an open conversation and say, hey, I'm going to be getting up a little bit earlier, or I'm going to bed a little bit earlier so I could start banking the sleep. So just have those conversations if you're in that situation. Number two, and this comes to your physical fitness. Well, in taper week, this is typically where you're going to lighten or lessen your intensity and the duration of the activities you're doing. Now, you still might go lift a little bit of weight, but instead of doing 3 or 4 sets, maybe you're just doing 2. You're not going for your max out or trying to push as much weight as possible, right? That's not your goal during the taper week. It's actually to help promote recovery and rest your body to prep it for this explosive amount of energy that you're going to be putting out on that course on the day of the event. So remember, lighten that load and reduce the frequency. What I typically will do is I'll start to trail down or taper down my workouts as the week progresses towards race day. So for example, if it's 7 days out, I may be doing an hour, 20-minute run, and then over the next few days, I'm probably only doing a few different runs, maybe 30 minutes, but I'm doing it at like 50%, right? I'm not trying to overexert myself. I definitely want to focus on injury prevention, but I don't want to make my muscles overwork so they're not going to be primed and ready to go. Now, that's the first point when it comes to lessening the intensity and reducing the duration of how much I'm going to put in there. Same thing with swimming, same things with biking. Not that 2-hour full max that I was doing a few weeks before or a brick workout. I'm just going to do some light coasting. Just make sure the muscles are flowing, we're getting the blood moving, and we're keeping all the muscles and joints limber, right? That's the whole purpose. Now, number two, with lightening activity, is add in some additional stretching and flexibility. Pull out that foam roller, pull out that thermal gun, some band workouts for a little bit of resistance, not to strengthen or tear down the muscle, but really to make sure that it maintains that pliability, because you going into the event, you don't want to hurt yourself. That's a high important factor, right? Next to sleep. Injury prevention is like number 2. But you don't want to overstretch your muscles nor go in being tense, right? Sometimes when we get into those race days, and I've done it too, we go out super hard, we over fatigue our muscles in the first few minutes or 20, 30, 40 minutes of an event, or we push harder than we have been in practice and we end up spraining a muscle or tearing it a little bit and cramping up, right? We want to prevent that. And so if you've already been incorporating stretching into your training regimen over the last 3, 6, 9 weeks, whatever it is that you've decided to go, just keep doing that and add in a little bit more. Spend a little bit more time working in those hip flexors, through ab or adductor workouts. Stretch out those quads, those hamstrings, even the shoulders, the necks, the triceps, biceps. All of the muscles that you're going to be using during swimming and biking and running are going to be key. Pay extra special care to those. And if you want a little added tip, go and see a chiropractor or a masseuse therapist 3-4 days before, because once you go in to those, it may take you 1 to 2, 3+ days to come back to normal, right? Because typically they're going to put in a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and sometimes you may be sore the next day, and you're definitely not going to want to be that sore leading right into your race day for peak performance. Now, number 3, equally important to sleep and lighter activity, focus on your hydration. Start reducing the amount of caffeine that you're being taken in, increase your water, and add in additional electrolytes as you start building. Now, I'm not saying double right away. Don't do anything like that. Don't overcompensate. If you've already taken in enough water for what you've been training, you're probably good. But just remember, as you come closer, make sure that you got enough water in your system the few days before, because you want your muscles a little fuller, because you're going to put them on a lot of intense pressure and stress right when you get going in these events. Because the crazy thing about being in a triathlon, as such as the half Ironman in Chattanooga, is you trained hard, but when you get in that moment where there's a ton of other competitors that have equally be training, some farther than you, some not as much as you, all different areas of abilities, you're going to see that there's going to be another switch, and you're going to want to go harder because maybe you start comparing yourself to the other athletes there. And that happens. Believe me, it does. You can see it in people's faces. I've done it many of times, but I've learned over the last few years, you got to run your own race. Don't try to catch the person next to you unless you're at an all-out sprint at the finish line, right? And you're not doing it to beat them unless you're going for the top seeded for either the elites or the age groupers, or maybe it's your buddy. But the goal isn't that. It's to push yourself as hard as you can. Just use that as fuel to go faster, not that you're competing with the other individuals in the race, because you know what? You're going to help them out. They're going to help you out. And everybody's going to be moving forward at different speeds and paces. And we just want to make sure everybody has a safe race. So don't try to overcompete with the person next to you just because you're fired up. This is your very first triathlon. Typically, you're going to blow up somewhere in the middle or towards the end, and then it's going to be a hell of a time to cross that finish line. So as I mentioned, the top 3 tips for tapering successfully: bank that extra sleep, get a lot of rest starting 3 to 5 days, 7 days before that race, because you know the night before you're going to get very little sleep. Number 2 part on that, adjust your sleep cycle. Remember, you're going to be up 2-3 hours before the race even starts. And that's when you got to make sure that you are well rested, and don't use those 3 hours of trying to figure out what you need to do, right? You don't want to have to think about what you need to do before the race. You just want to be on autopilot and say, boom, 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 and then it's race time. So make sure you are well rested. Number 2, lighten the activity, increase your stretching and flexibility. You want to be very limber going into your endurance event. And number 3, start banking in that hydration, because believe it or not, when you get into the heat of battle in an ultra event or a triathlon, you're going to explode through more water than you know what to do with. Make sure that you're taking in the proper electrolytes and sodium to make sure that you're balanced, right? Because one of the quickest ways to fall out of a race and lose your competitive edge is to get dehydrated because you weren't monitoring what you were doing. So start loading up on those things 3 to 5 plus days before the race. And believe me, you're going to have a wonderful race because you'll be on prime condition once that starting gun goes off, that you're just going to hit go. And then it's all out battle between you and yourself all the way to that finish line. Well, that's it for this week's. Thanks for tuning in. I'll give you a short, small, special episode next week when I'm down in Chattanooga for the 70.3 Ironman Chattanooga. Wish me the best of luck. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultra Catalyst podcast. If you got any questions, DM, put the comments down below. And as always, share this episode with someone that needs to hear it. Until next time, we out.